Hi, so this is going to be a walkthrough of my printmaking process for the dry point project in my monotype class. I am a beginner printer and this technique was challenging. Here are all the copies I made thus far. There are so many variations you can do, so each one is its own little experiment. And this is the stencil, which is made out of vinyl plastic, and the way the technique works is ink is filled into these grooves in the vinyl made by a dry point needle. That's why it's called dry point, and then it's run through the press and the ink is deposited onto your paper. Anyway, let's get into it. I used black etching ink and gloves, of course, because this process is a mess. Just scraping out a small amount. You want to scrape out the ink gently to prevent the rest of the ink jar from drying out. These are communally used by the class and they get kind of beat up, but if you scrape it out so the least amount of surface is broken, it will preserve the ink longer. I added in some burnt plate oil to the ink to make it a little smoother, looser, less stiff, but I learned afterwards I didn't need to do that. Etching ink was already the right consistency for what I was doing. Actually, my print might have been even better without the oil, as the ink would have been more stickier and thicker and stick inside the grooves better. Next, using little squares cut out of scraps of thicker paper, you scrape up some ink and spread it onto the stencil. The goal is to press it in to all of the grooves carved into the vinyl plastic. So I'm taking my time here and really trying to just push it into those grooves. This print is a self-portrait and it depicts me vomiting up hearts. It's a reflection of several things I was dealing with at the time. I was doing a lot of healing from a heartbreak, from my own bad habits, and from some fear. Something scary had happened to me. And I was learning that life, much like printmaking, can be a mess. Actually, what I am doing here is scraping up the ink. I learned quickly that printmaking is like cooking, and if you clean as you go, it's gonna be a better time, much like life. So I'm scraping up the ink that got into the table, wiping it up with some mineral spirits and denatured alcohol, which dissolves the ink and makes it easier to clean. Now it is time to remove the ink from the surface while keeping it in the grooves. So I'm first using a scrap piece of newsprint paper pressed into it to collect some of that ink, see all that ink get picked up. And then using a tarlatan, which is a cheesecloth stiffened with primer, we wipe up the rest of the ink. Folding it into a ball, you drag it across the stencil so it doesn't take out any of the ink that we've gotten inside the grooves, it only wipes off what's on top. And this part of the process takes a while. So, like I was saying before, I made this print in the wake of a horrible heartbreak. Something had been wrong for a while and I was ignoring it successfully until I couldn't anymore and realized it needed to end. When I told him, he didn't fight it in the slightest, which was confirmations of my fears, and I packed up my stuff and we said goodbye. It was easily one of the most excruciating things I had ever experienced. They call it a heartbreak for good reason, because it truly feels as though your heart is ripping apart. I was in ribbons, and for a while I felt as though I could feel those broken shards of my heart rattling around in there, and I would just wish and wish I could somehow throw them up and get them out of me. But this print is about more than just that, because it is also about the mess I had made out of my love life in the wake of said heartbreak. My cure for a breakup has always been a new relationship. I like to jump in, do no healing, and distract myself with loving someone new in order to cope with the pain of losing the last one. Except for this time around, there was an issue. I wanted to change and grow as a person. Periods of changing yourself are the worst because you must drop the coping tools you had in order to develop the new ones you want, and in doing so you are left with none for a time. Long story short, I managed not to jump into a new serious long-term relationship, but instead found myself juggling multiple situationships I'd created, which I was quickly realizing was also not the coping mechanism I was in search for. So this print may be a little bit about all that and the desire to release everything, the desire to just purge it all. I am now obviously preparing the paper, folding it and tearing it to size. I wish I could tell you what kind of paper this is, but I was experimenting with so many things at the time, I just have no idea. But what I can tell you is that the paper must take a bath. So I got it in there to soak in water for about 20 to 30 minutes while I finished preparing the plate. The title of this piece is called Valentine's Day, so red is appropriate. Here's a good example of beat up ink because people were not scraping from the can correctly and gently. So this is what it looks like all janky. I am getting a little laid out to roll up on my brayer, and my plan is to add a thin transparent layer of red to my print. I thought maybe the transparency would make the red appear pink on top of the paper. This was that experiment. I did some with thicker red layers as well, and those turned out probably a little cooler than this. You'll have to tell me what you think. The red also adds a little violence, and I wanted the art to be a little violent because it's meant to be a dramatic purging the shards of my broken heart, purging the mess I'd made out of my love life at the time. Purge like I'd only experienced once before several months prior. I was roofied at a party. It was a pretty terrible night. I made it home safe, if not sound. I have no memory of anything after sipping that drink until I was suddenly on my kitchen floor. My hair and skin sticky, my face in a puddle of vomit, and every time I tried to crawl or move, I would just vomit again. And everything coming out of me was black, which was like a nightmare. I learned later black vomit is an indication of internal bleeding and a sign of being drugged. It was both a horrid release and it was my body doing its best to help me. It took some time and some therapy to get over what happened. I was lucky in a lot of ways, but also left with a lot of fear. But what I've learned since then is that release isn't always a pretty sight. Accepting, letting go, changing, and growth are ugly and violent as they are peaceful and beautiful. And this print is about the embrace of that ugliness. I was determined to continue on the path I'd begun. Anyway, we are finally at the culmination of this print. I got the press all set up. It's a complicated process that I almost always need help on, so if you want advice on it, go elsewhere. You saw me get my paper out of the bath and pat it dry on a towel. The soaked paper takes the ink off the stencil well, but it doesn't need to be soaking wet. If we used dry paper, I'm not sure exactly what would happen, but it's likely the ink just wouldn't transfer completely to the paper. I lined up the paper perfectly on the press and then catch it in the press and center the plate underneath it. Roll that on through, and voila! The best thing about the stencil is that it leaves an embossment on the paper. See how the paper is dented in the shape of the woman, of me? And there you go, all done. Each print has special characteristics to it and taught me what I wanted to try on the next one. Printing is a fickle art form, so it's easy to mess up in any little part of this entire giant process that will completely alter your end product. I love the perfection it demands from me, and I'm excited to keep failing until I conquer it. Also, I have this print available as an art poster on my Etsy. If you're interested in an original, you can reach out to me over Instagram Messenger or my email. Thank you so much for watching, and I would love to hear what other videos you'd like to see me make.